In the previous episode, after defeating all of the enemies including the abyssal fire spirit, oh right, the little succubus Alice once again got away. But that's the least of Lin's concerns since he's about to enter the divinity secret realm. As we continue the story, Mo Yun remembers that the elders of her family have left a simple piece of advice when entering the secret realm, which is to keep moving forward and never take a step back. With that in mind, the two of them soon stepped into the portal. On the other side of the portal, nothing but a floating stone stairway. Literally just that. No fancy landscapes or dramatic scenery, just floating rocks. There were two paths leading to the top. They both took a deep breath, and together they stepped onto the first platform. The moment they stepped on it, the platform behind them vanished. As if that wasn't enough, the place itself shifted around them. It became pretty clear. If they took even one step backward, they'd be kicked out of the secret realm for good, and they won't get a second chance. But Lin noticed something else. There was some sort of pressure every step they took, like a weight pressing down. The higher they went, the stronger it'd get. Luckily, both of them were summoners, and Mo Yun's own spirits weren't exactly weak. Lin wasn't too worried about her for now. Plus, thanks to his soul crystal and scythe, his own spirit points were off the charts. The two of them were almost walking side by side, just a few meters apart, when they suddenly stopped at the same time. In front of them, golden lines started glowing on the steps ahead, and this is the real juicy part. Turned out, there were 500 steps in total. For the first 100, each step only had a single thread of these energies, but onwards, it will increase to 2 threads, and by the end, there'd be 5. Lin had heard from White Divine that in order to obtain divinity, they needed at least 100 threads of these energies. So, at the bare minimum, they had to climb past the 100th step. But was Lin the kind of guy who would settle for just the minimum? Of course not. Let's see what happens next. As they continued climbing, the pressure did increase, but it wasn't anything too overwhelming. Lin could feel each thread of energy flowing through him. If 100 threads were enough to form divinity, why were there 500 steps? He couldn't help but wonder, what if collecting all of them would make the divinity even stronger? The thought fired him up. He clenched his fists, determined to find out. Not long after, the two of them spotted something in the distance, a massive pot, also known as a cauldron. Lin raised an eyebrow. A 3-legged divine cauldron? Wasn't that something from legends in his old world? Meanwhile, Mo Yun was panting heavily, drenched in sweat. But she kept pushing forward, determined. She told Lin that if they could gather enough divine energy, their chances of a class elevation during their second-class transfer would shoot up to 90%. And if they made it to the end of the steps, the odds during their third-class transfer would hit 80%. Lin nodded, but while this was great and all, his attention was on that cauldron. What was something from his old world doing here? A few moments later, the pressure kicked up a notch. Mo Yun had just reached the 50th step, and the force hit her like a tidal wave. While the two of them were moving at roughly the same pace, it was clear that Mo Yun was feeling the strain far more than Lin. Minutes later, Lin finally stepped onto the 100th step. As soon as the 100th thread of divine energy flowed into his body, a wave of indescribable comfort spread through him. Then, a system notification popped up. Divinity, Level 1. All stats increase by an additional 1% when leveling up, spirit recovery speed increased by 100%, and fatigue recovery speed increased by 100%. Lin couldn't help but smile in surprise. Now he understood why it was so crucial to gain divinity early. No wonder White Divine had urged him to come here as soon as possible. An extra 1% stat boost every time he leveled up? He wondered if he could surpass his teacher in the future, but for now, his focus was clear. Upgrade his divinity and make it more OP. Meanwhile, Mo Yun had finally made it to the 100th step, drenched in sweat but still standing. As the divine energy surged through her, it washed away her exhaustion. She glanced over at Lin, curious to see how he was doing, only to find him already climbing again, completely unfazed, like it was a casual stroll in the park. But Mo Yun knew one thing for sure. Lin was a total freak. No one could compare to him. Watching his back as he climbed higher, she muttered to herself, I have no idea what kind of heights this guy will reach. He's only level 30, and he might just break White Divine's record at this rate. Sometime later, Lin got another system notification. His divinity had leveled up again. Now all of his stats would increase by 2% with every level up. But even that wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. He always wanted more. Meanwhile, Mo Yun was grinding her teeth, struggling as she reached the 115th step. With a long, exhausted sigh, she finally made it and felt her own divinity hit level 2. She slumped onto the steps, too tired to even stand. In her family's records, reaching level 2 was considered a huge achievement, something only the most talented could pull off. She hadn't shamed her family, at least. Even White Divine had only reached level 5, so maybe she had a shot at that too. But when she glanced over at Lin's position, she felt like she'd just taken a hit from a 1,000-pound hammer. He was already way ahead. She muttered to herself, "This guy is a monster. Being born in the same era as him is just plain unlucky." On Lin's side, his divinity finally reached level 5, and yet, the pressure around him? Still not enough to slow him down. Suddenly, a powerful aura exploded from Mo Yun's side of the path. Turns out, she had summoned her unicorn. Lin blinked in surprise. So you could use skills here. Good to know. As she reached the 200th step, her unicorn vanished, and she collapsed onto the ground, completely wiped out. It seemed this was her limit, but the good news? She'd managed to level her divinity to level 5 as well. Meanwhile, Lin was still climbing, slowly but steadily. He had now reached the 300th step, but his pace was starting to slow down. By the time he hit the 400th step, sweat was pouring down his forehead. His jaw clenched as he took another step. He wasn't about to stop now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he arrived at the 490th step. At this point, Lin was drenched in sweat, panting heavily, each breath a struggle. The pressure was so intense it was forcing him to hunch over, and every step forward felt impossible. Was this really his limit? The cauldron was so close, practically within arm's reach, and he had to know what secrets this world was hiding. But he wasn't ready to give up. With a deep breath, he uses his mighty soldier ability, instantly boosting all his attributes by 200%, including his spirits. The crushing pressure that had been weighing him down vanished in an instant. And soon, Lin reached the 499th step. Waves of energy surged into him, but his mind was completely locked on the giant cauldron in front of him. Just as he'd suspected, it really was connected to the world he remembered. Peering inside, he was shocked to find that it was filled with energy. It turns out, the energy outside had just been a tiny fraction of what was inside the cauldron. If he could absorb all of this, Lin wondered how many levels his divinity might skyrocket. But as he reached out to touch it, an invisible barrier stopped him. Then, without warning, the cauldron began to tremble violently. It wasn't just the cauldron. The entire secret realm started to shake. Mo Yun snapped her head up, startled, wondering what on earth was happening. The tremors intensified, and Lin gripped the cauldron tightly. The next thing they knew, both of them blacked out. When Lin finally regained consciousness, he found himself back on the eternal trial grounds, with Mo Yun lying next to him. Groggy, he checked his stat window, and his eyes widened in shock. He was still 8% away from leveling up. But that wasn't the shocking part. Nor, it was the fact that his spirit points is at 19,000. No, what really had him staring in disbelief was his divinity, which was now level 30. He began reading it slowly. Divinity, level 30. All stats increase by 30% with each level up. Spirit recovery speed increased by 3,000%, and fatigue recovery speed increased by 3,000%. Had he absorbed all of the energy from the cauldron? It seemed impossible, but here it was, staring him in the face. And yet, Lin was sure of one thing. Level 30 wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The only reason his divinity had stopped at level 30 was because he himself was still level 30. He chuckled to himself. Looks like he had even more leveling up to do. The entrance to the secret realm had vanished, and now the cauldron was in Lin's hands. But the real question was, would the realm ever return? And what was the connection between the cauldron, the primordial rune, and the world from his memories? Before he could dwell on it any longer, Mo Yun woke up, snapping him out of his thoughts. Rubbing her head, she asked, "What just happened?" Lin tells her that when he reaches the top, the whole realm kind of just exploded. Mo Yun's eyes went wide, her jaw dropping. "Wait, what? You reached the very top and made the secret realm explode?" She sounded incredulous. Then, almost immediately, she then asked about his divinity. Lin calmly tells her that it's level 30. Mo Yun froze, staring at him in disbelief. That's impossible. But then again, she thought to herself, if it was Lin, Was anything really impossible? Just then, the red light pillar above her faded and shifted down to her hand, forming a rune. Mo Yun finally finished fusing the rune and realized she'd gained a new skill, called Unstoppable. For 1 minute, her speed would increase tenfold. She'd be immune to all damage, and she could go through anything, including barriers, magical arrays. The cooldown was only an hour. Lin considered it for a moment and nodded, saying it's a very OP skill. Mo Yun smiled, then summoned her unicorn, turning to Lin. Appreciate him for looking out for her all this time, but she thinks it's time she set out on her own. She needs to grow too, not just rely on Lin's protection. Lin nodded. He watched as she rode off, her figure shrinking into the distance, when she suddenly waved her hands and shouted back from the sky, "See you next time." After seeing her leave, it's time for our boy to get back on the grind. Over the next few days, Lin battled relentlessly, taking down demons, dragons, and all of the mobs he encountered. However, the upper levels of the trial ground were divided into 3 main areas, and from the enemies he was facing, all around level 55, it was clear he had entered the core region, and Lin finally leveled up, reaching level 31. Just as Lin had expected, his divinity had leveled up to 31 as well. It seemed the energy in the cauldron wasn't fully absorbed after all. Feeling stronger, he pressed on but soon stumbled upon something unexpected. A cluster of corpses. It looked like a battle had taken place here. Could it be humans were fighting nearby? He quickly rushed forward and saw a group of demons fiercely attacking a team of human professionals. The leading knight shouted, "Hold on just a little longer. The dungeon is about to form, and then they will go inside." But the demons only laughed wickedly, promising they wouldn't give them that chance. And then, out of nowhere, a flash of sword waves streaked through the air. Lin's eyes widened as he spotted the figure behind it. It was his sister.